So thank you all for joining us for the Grad School Prep Series, the Application Process Workshop. Joining us today is Dr. Dave Beasley, Admissions and Recruitment Specialist at the UNLV Graduate College. He's going to discuss with us the application process, essential pieces of an application, and how to increase your chances of getting accepted. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave to get us started.
Thanks so much, Mar. I'm really glad to be with you all today. As Marlena said, I'm Dr. Dave Beasley. I'm the Recruitment and Admission Specialist here with the UNLV Graduate College. And so I've got about a half-hour long presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers afterwards. So feel free to drop questions in the chat along the way. And feel free as well to to ask them once we get to that stage. So what I have prepared for you all, let me go ahead and share my screen, and we can kind of get started here. What I have prepared are some general pieces of information about the graduate or professional school application. And then to talk a little bit about each of them, and to try to give you all some tips for really putting together a standout application. So let's kind of dive right in here. And I want to start with, just so we're all on the same page, with just some clarification about what graduate school is and what professional school is, because I'm sure some of you are looking at graduate school and some of you are looking at professional school. And I just want us to be clear about that definition, because that is going to make a difference in terms of how you're putting together your application and the parts of your application as well, whether or not you're going to graduate school or professional school. So really the difference between graduate and professional school is a matter of emphasis. Graduate degrees emphasize research and the production or extension of knowledge in a field, while professional degrees emphasize training for a specific career. Now, that said, folks in graduate school get plenty of career training. Folks in professional school do plenty of research, right? So, an example of professional school is, law school, medical school, dental school, something like that. My partner is a lawyer. She will happily tell you about all the hours she spent in the law library doing research. I have graduate degrees, and I will happily tell you about all the career training I received as part of them. So, but again, it's just really a matter of emphasis. Let's talk about a little bit more of a breakdown too. So with a graduate degree, you're talking about 2 to 5 years to complete, depending on whether or not you're going for a master's, Master of Fine Arts, a doctorate, right? It's going to vary a little bit. Graduate degrees are going to, again, have that heavy focus on research and the creation of new knowledge. You're going to be expected to do extensive research and scholarship in your subject area. There are some graduate assistantships available in grad school. That's really good news for those of you who know about them. And if you're not sure about those, definitely ask some of your mentors. Come join us for Grad School 101 and paying for grad school sometime. We'll be happy to tell you about them. A lot of graduate programs, you're looking for a minimum GPA of 3.0, but some programs are going to be significantly higher, right? Really, it's going to vary school to school, program to program. Some programs require testing. For professional school, on the other hand, you're looking at 3 to 5 years to complete, right? Like if you go to school full-time in law school, right, that's a 3-year program. Med schools tend to be 4-year programs. If you go part-time, obviously that's going to change your timeline a little bit. Professional schools also in many cases require additional training or licensing after the completion of your degree. So if you graduate from law school, you got to take the bar exam, right? Graduate from med school, you still got to do your residency and some of those other things. Professional schools are often harder to get into than graduate schools. And usually you're looking at a little bit higher GPA to get started, right? Usually you're looking to be around a 3.5, especially if you're looking to go to law school, can be even higher for dental school and medical school. There's a lot of high stakes testing. So those of you looking at professional school, you'll want to probably devote more time to test prep than those of you looking at grad school, though those of you looking at grad school, you still want to spend some time preparing for those tests. And there's not as much, it's not really graduate assistantships available, but there are a lot of scholarships and things like that. So when we start the application process, and some of you may have heard me say this before, where you research and apply to programs rather than schools. Okay, so each university is going to have a slightly different system. Some are going to be highly centralized, some are going to be highly decentralized. So in the centralized ones, everything you do is going to go through the grad college. Or their graduate programs. If it's highly decentralized, you're probably never going to talk to their graduate college. you're only going to talk to the program that you're interested in. Those of you looking at professional schools, they usually have entirely separate admissions offices. So for example, here at UNLV, I recruit for over 175 programs, but I do not recruit for the law school, the dental school, or the medical school. They all have their own offices, and so I refer people over to them quite frequently. It's important that you start narrowing down your programs of interest early. If you're not sure where to start, talk to your faculty, talk to grad students, try petersons.com. There's all kinds of resources out there to sort of help you get started on like where you want to go to school. Also, most programs are either going to have like a separate admissions office like we talked about, or they're going to have some sort of coordinator or designated faculty member that's going to be in charge of recruitment, in charge of talking to new students. You want to identify who these people are in the programs that you're interested in, and you want to start talking to them early on, right? And it doesn't have to be some huge heart-to-heart conversation to start with, right? It can really just be as simple as an introductory email, dear professor such and such, my name is, I'm currently a student at UNLV studying this. I'm really interested in your program. I wonder if, you might share a little bit more about it. Maybe you've done a little bit more research on it. You have questions about specific tracks in the program, things like that. You just sort of want to get on their radar so they know who you are. The other thing you want to do is determine the application requirements and start preparing materials. So when it comes to application requirements, these can vary a little bit from school to school. Sometimes they don't vary at all, right? Like if you're applying to med school, there's like one central application portal that you're submitting all your stuff into, okay? Other things, if you're applying for a doctorate in English, right? That's what I have. My applications varied a little bit. I applied to 6 different schools for my PhD. They varied a little bit, but they were all pretty similar. And then remember, of course, hit all your deadlines. What I always recommend with people, if you're applying to multiple schools, is to look at what your earliest application deadline is, because each school's deadline is going to be a little bit different. They're all going to probably cluster around the same time of the year, but some of them will be earlier than others. And so I always say, look at your first deadline, get everything ready by then, and then just send everything in to all your schools on that first deadline. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the timeline, because I do think it's important to talk about like how early you need to be doing things. So about 1 year before the deadline, you want to gather information, narrow down your programs. If you're looking at professional school, especially, you want to start shadowing. At that point, getting your hours in. Internships never hurt for graduate or professional schools. Research experience is great for grad school and professional school for that matter. 6 to 12 months before the application are due, you want to begin reaching out to schools and programs, and you want to start sort of putting together a study plan for those standardized tests. And those of you looking, law school, med school with those really, really high stakes testing, boy, go start as soon as you can studying for those. Those test scores can make a really big difference. 3 to 6 months beforehand, you want to start preparing portfolios, writing samples, drafting your personal statements, figuring out who you're going to ask for letters of recommendation. And we'll talk about all of this a little bit more as we go. 1 to 3 months before the application deadline, you want to sit for your exams. You want to continue the preparation of materials, ask for letters of rec, prepare your resume or CV. And the reason that you want to do this a couple of months beforehand is it takes a while to get official scores. It can take 5 or 6 weeks sometimes to get official scores. So you want to make sure that you give yourself plenty of time. And then also that way you can sort of put that off to the side, right? After you finish that, you're like, okay, I've taken my standardized test. Now I can spend the rest of my time, devote the rest of my time here. And then I always tell everybody, submit everything a week or two early. Give yourself time to get needed materials in if there are problems, if anything gets hung up in the system, if you've got to track down a recommender and be like, hey, they don't have your letter. That way, if you hit any snags in the process, you give yourself a week or so to correct them and nothing's ever late, right? Whereas if you wait till the absolute last minute to send everything in and then you have a problem, well, now you got stuff coming in late, right? Some programs are going to be more understanding than others, but my advice is to do it all a little bit early. So I want to talk also about minimum requirements and competitive applications, because these are not always synonymous. Sometimes they are. It really depends on the program, right? But lots of programs out there establish minimum requirements, but just meeting the minimum is really no guarantee of admission. So I want to encourage all of you to exceed that, okay? For example, the clinical psychology PhD program at UNLV establishes a minimum GPA of 3.0, but admitted students, the median GPA is 3.7, right? So like, coming in with an application to a program like that, you could, at 3.1, 3.2, you're a full half point lower than really competitive applicants. So just be aware of that. Also be aware that a lot of programs take a set number of students each year and receive far more applications than the number of students, than the number of places they have, right? So the Doctor of Physical Therapy program here at UNLV, they received 461 applications for 48 spots last year. So if you do some quick math in your head, that's a less than 10% overall, right? So this is why you want to really put together a great application so that you can be at the top of the pile. So let's talk about the application process, and let's start by talking about the application review process, right? Because we're putting together an application for a specific audience, right? So it's just like any other writing task, right? We have an audience, we want to meet their needs. We know what they want to see, we know what they expect to see, and we want to make sure that they see that. So know that most schools take what's called a holistic approach to admissions. This means that the entire application package is considered. So you want to make sure each part is as strong as you can. This is kind of a good news, bad news thing, right? The good news about this is if you have one area of your application that's not quite as strong as you'd like it to be, this can lift other areas, right? Sort of the bad news about this is you've got to work really, really hard on every single aspect of it, right? It's not enough just to have that really good GPA and say, okay, I'm basically done here, or have that really high test score and be like, hey, I'm gold, right? There's a lot of really competitive applicants out there with high GPAs, with high test scores. So how do you really sort of stand out in this process, right? First of all is to know the kinds of things that you're going to need to prepare and sort of how to do all of these things. So there's personal statements, there's CVs or resumes, there's letters of recommendation, there's transcripts from all colleges that you've attended, and then there's standardized testing. And so we're going to sort of go through these. And I want to start with personal statements. And the reason I want to start with these is partially because these are kind of near and dear to my heart. I used to work in the UNLV Writing Center. I've helped a lot of people with their personal statements. I really like working on personal statements. But the other thing that I'll say here is that this really is a chance for you to really make yourself shine and to stand out from other applicants. So your grades are your grades. Your standardized test scores are your standardized test scores, right? There's not a whole lot that you can really do there that you haven't already done, right? You can prepare for the test, but then you've got a score sitting on the page. You can prepare, you can do really well in your courses, but it's still just a collection of grades on a piece of paper, right? The personal statement's where you can really stand out. It's where you can make an impact on a committee, and a committee can be like, oh, yes, we really like this person. So couple of things to talk about, and I'll also do a shameless plug for our grad school applications 201 workshop here at the Grad College, where we do a lot more in-depth information on personal statements, transcripts, letters of recommendation, and testing. But just to give you an overall sense here, right? For personal statements, you want to be competent yet teachable. That's what I tell everybody, right? You don't want to sort of throw yourself at the mercy of the committee and say, teach me, O wise ones, I know nothing, because then they don't want to admit you, right? Like, why would they admit somebody who doesn't know anything? At the same time, you don't want to sort of sidle up to them and be like, hey, look, I kind of already know everything here. So why don't you just let me in your program and it'll be cool, right? Because then you're not teachable, right? So I always sort of tell people to show a committee why you're qualified, right? Like whether that's undergraduate coursework, career work that you've done, a little bit of both, right? Like, what are the things that make you qualified to sit in the room? But then you also want to talk about the things that you want to learn, right? Here's what I know. Here's what I'm really excited to learn about. You want to customize each personal statement if possible. I say if possible because there are these big application portals like for med school, and you can't customize a med school personal statement. But I would say if you are able to do it, if you're submitting it to each individual school, pick something about each school or program to discuss specifically in that statement, whether it's a faculty member, a lab that you want to work in, a research collection at the library, whatever it is, show them that you have done some homework on the program, on the school, and that you know the kinds of things happening. Sometimes programs will specifically ask for this, right? Like, for example, if you're interested in our master's or our PhD in biology here at UNLV, right? They straight up tell you like, hey, you need to reach out to program faculty. You need to find somebody who's willing to take you on in their lab. You need to identify that person, right? Other times it could just be sort of showing what you know about the program. If it's graduate school, if it's a graduate school application, you want to really focus on research experience and your research interests and goals. If anybody's applying for a doctorate, you've got to talk about specific research interests, and you've got to say, this is what I want to do my doctoral research on. That's really, really important. If it's a professional school application, you want to really lean into any professional experience that you have, assure the committee that you understand the career itself and the kinds of things that that you'll be doing there, right? You don't want them to feel like that that you just watched a few episodes of ER and decided that a doctor looked like an exciting career, right? You want to show that you really understand, hey, here are the rigors of the process. I understand all of this. This is what I want to do, right? Okay, so that's the personal statement. So I also want to talk about sort of resume and CV building. And this is, I think, where we really talk about the grad school application process. Because this is stuff that you have to start doing 6 months, a year, even longer out, right, to have enough sort of relevant experience, right? So research experience is great for those of you looking at graduate degrees, especially if you want to go directly to a PhD. So, look around, especially if you want to stay in your program, but even if you think you might want to do something different, still anything you can do to get research experience is good, right? So anything you can do working in a lab, working with faculty on things that they're working on, talk with your professors, talk with graduate students. If you're not sure where to start, or if you're just like, hey, I don't really know anything about this, go down and check with the Office of Undergraduate Research here on campus. Just get involved however you can, because it'll really help you as time goes on. It's also great stuff to talk about in your personal statement. The same is true of work experience and internships. These are especially helpful no matter what you're doing, but especially for professional school. If you're looking to go to med school, law school, business school, admissions committees really want to see relevant work, volunteer, shadowing experience, right? You want to go to law school, see if you can get a gig over the summer working in a law office, right? Same thing is true of med school, right? Same thing is true of professional school, business school. I mean, anything you can do to get some experience in the field is really important. And for certain applications, right, you need so many hours of volunteer experience, you need so many hours of shadowing experience, you want to start this early, okay? For those of you that are interested in medical school, dental school, physical therapy, occupational therapy, the Pre-Professional Advising Center here on campus has great resources for you, and I really encourage you to reach out to them. So for that next level resume and CV building, the stuff that can really make you stand out. And this is good for everybody to do, but especially if you're looking at highly, highly competitive programs. Conference presentations and publications can really take your resume or your CV to the next level, okay? If you're involved in lab research on campus, talk with faculty and grad students. See if you can be involved in a conference presentation, right? Also, the Office of Undergraduate Research hosts regular undergraduate research symposia throughout the year. So this is where I sort of make a distinction a little bit between those of you who are involved in like social sciences and STEM fields and those of you who are more in sort of humanities. So those of you in social sciences and STEM fields, there's a lot of team-based research that happens in those fields. So it might be a little bit easier because you're already part of a lab, you're already part of a project, it's a little bit easier to do that. Those of you in the humanities, we're more sort of in the single author realm of things, right? Because I'm right there with you, okay? And so in that case, this is where, and I recommend the Office of Undergraduate Research Symposia for everybody, but especially for those of you in the humanities, it's sort of another route to kind of get your foot in the door somewhere. The same is true of publications, right? Nobody anticipates that as an undergraduate, you will have a publication, okay? That is not an expectation at all, right? But boy, if you do, that's the kind of thing that can really make your application stand out. So again, if you're involved as part of a research team, see if you can be responsible for a section of a publication or work on a study or something you can do to get your name. Even if you're the fifth, sixth, seventh author, it's still a publication. Also, be aware that the Office of Undergraduate Research publishes Spectra, which is a peer-reviewed journal for undergraduate research. So that's a great way for you to be involved in publication, no matter no matter what field you're in, but especially those of you in the humanities, where it can be a little bit tougher to be involved in something like that as an undergraduate. So, sorry about that. Let's go to letters of recommendation. Got an extra slide there, my apologies. So for graduate programs, professors are what they're going to look for. Those can speak to research skills. If you're applying for an assistantships, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are applying for an assistantship, please tell your recommenders so they can talk about what a great graduate assistant you'll make. Right? Let them do some of that work for you, right? Let them say, hey, such and such is a great student and they'll be an amazing graduate assistant. And here's why you should give them money. If it's a professional program, professors and supervisors, especially those in career-related areas, right? So, that can be a little bit different. It really sort of depends. Obviously, if you're going to med school and you have a great relationship with your anatomy professor, that's a great place to go. But also getting something from from a doctor that you shadowed. If you're looking at law school, something from an attorney. These are game changers. For letters of recommendation. I don't want anybody to be worried about a bad letter of recommendation. They really don't exist. So, I've been in around graduate admissions for a long time. I have a lot of friends that have too. Between us, we've only ever seen one bad letter. That said, reaching out to people early on, being super duper organized in your process and telling people exactly what you need and exactly when you need it can help you get stronger letters of recommendation. All right, transcripts. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this. So you'll need transcripts from all colleges and universities that you attended. If you went to school outside the US, you might need a foreign credential evaluation. Now, if you just did like a study abroad semester, you won't need to worry about that. Some schools will take official transcripts, others will take unofficial transcripts. So you want to find out what you need to submit. So official transcripts come directly from the college or university registrar and they cost money, okay? Unofficial transcripts, for those of you, for you all, right, you can just download these from my UNLV. So I would always recommend reaching out to see if the schools or programs you're applying to will accept unofficial transcripts. You can save yourself a few dollars, right? At UNLV, we accept unofficial transcripts. And then if you're accepted into the program and you do go ahead and come to UNLV, then we need official transcripts, but not until that time. Each transcript will cost, depending on the school, a lot of you have done all of your work here at UNLV. Some of you have come from other schools and transferred in. So depending on where you went, it's usually between $5 and $15. The UNLV transcripts are $10. So it's not a major expense, but if you're applying to 5 or 6 schools and you went to 2 or 3 schools, you can see that could really quickly add up. So definitely see if they'll accept unofficials to start with. Testing is another piece I just want to go over really briefly. So the first thing I want to say is check with your program to see if they even require testing. Now, if you're going to law school or med school, they require testing. I can promise you that. But other kinds of programs, some do, some don't. Some schools do, some schools don't, right? So I would really check with them. I would also see if, some programs will waive it if your GPA is high enough, if you're above a certain level. Right. So I've seen programs do that, like, hey, we require the GRE test, but if your GPA is a 3.5 or higher, we'll waive it. Also give yourself plenty of time to prepare for testing if it's required. You might need up to 6 months. You may even need more time than that, right? Depends a little bit on what kind of test taker you are. It also depends on which test you're going to take. If you're trying to go to med school, buckle up for the MCAT. I would say 6 months is a bare minimum. Right, you want to spend a lot of time prepping for that. The LSAT takes a lot of time to prep for. Subject exams can take a lot of prep for. It really depends. So I've just sort of listed some of the most common admissions tests here. There's the GRE, that's the most common for grad school. There's the Gmat, which is the most common for business school. That said, some grad programs might want you to take a Gmat, some business school programs might want you to take a GRE. So you want to check with each school. You also want to check, sometimes schools will take either one. So if you're applying to 3 schools and 2 of them require the GRE and the third will take the GRE or the Gmat, then obviously I would just take the GRE, right? There's the LSAT for law school, the MCAT for med school, and I guess it's just the DAT for dental school. So do be aware that there are different ones for different kinds of programs. So I know that's a lot of information to toss at you all, and we're going to have time for Q&A as I kind of wrap things up here. I do want to mention, though, that there are so many resources for you on campus here, right? This is in addition to the Grad Rebel Advantage program. It's in addition to your mentors, but just things that are available to you here on campus. The Writing Center is a great place for personal statements and to work on the language in your resume or CVs. Career Services is a great place to go for resumes. They can sort of help you get it formatted, and then the Writing Center can help you with the language. Office of Undergraduate Research is a great place to go for CVs. Again, they can help you get it formatted, and then the Writing Center can help you with the language. And then the Office of Undergraduate Research also hosts a Research Skills Academy. That's a great resource for you. UNLV Libraries. If you're not sure what research looks like in the field that you're interested in, you want to learn a little bit more, reach out to one of the subject librarians. Each and every discipline here on campus has a subject library. Also, the UNLV Libraries has a pretty good collection of test prep resources. And so that can be a good place to start when it comes time for you to study for those things. So that's everything that I have sort of in terms of a formal presentation today. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen and turn things back over to you all and see if anybody has any questions that I can answer or anything that I can go over maybe in a little bit more detail. So thanks so much for your time and your attention, and I'll give the time back to you, friends.
It looks like we have a question in the chat. Does the UNLV MBA program prefer the GRE or the GMAT?
They will take either one. I think they prefer the Gmat. So the scores that they're looking for are like, I believe it's a 550 minimum score for the Gmat. There is such a thing as a Gmat to GRE converter. So you can so if you already have GRE scores, for example, you can sort of put them into the converter and see if it would meet the minimum for the MBA program. But they will take either, but they prefer the Gmat.
And then if you graduate in the fall, when is the best time to apply?
That's a great question. So it kind of depends. And what I mean by that is it depends on whether or not your program will admit you in the spring. The program you're in will admit you in the spring. So, and this is a good question just to sort of talk about in general, right? So let's say that you're applying, that you're applying for the spring, and you're going to graduate this fall. You're going to apply for the spring. Your application deadline is like October 15th. Okay. So I get this question a lot, like, hey, can I apply for this program even though I don't have my bachelor's yet? And the answer to that is yes, you can, just so long as you have your bachelor's before your program starts. So if you're going to graduate in December and start grad school in January, no problem at all. They'll do what's called a conditional admit. And the condition will be that you finish your undergraduate degree, right? When I came here, I was a conditional admit because I was still finishing my master's, and the condition was that I finished my master's degree. So it really depends. If your program accepts spring applications, then in that case, you can go ahead and apply for the spring or wait till the fall. Almost all programs accept applications for the fall, some do in the spring. But, there's something to be said for taking that semester off and maybe just kind of taking a breather from school. So I think it really depends on what you want to do. And again, whether or not that program has spring admissions.
Dave, what is the minimum on the GMAT required by UNLV?
Sure. So the minimum. So UNLV doesn't. I just want to be clear about who's requiring what. So UNLV itself, the grad college, we don't require any testing, but the MBA program does. And so what they're looking for is a 550. They will take a lower score than that. But that that's based on sort of the other parts of your application. But they're looking for a 550 between quantitative and verbal.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been asked to present at Duke University as an undergrad. Is that going to help me to get into grad school?
Yes. Yes, 1,000% yes, absolutely. Yeah, so be sure that you put that on your resume or your CV, that presentation that you've given. Yeah, and especially, yeah, yes, that will absolutely help. And things like that, absolutely never hurt. But yeah, especially if it's an invited presentation, you can sort of indicate that on your resume or your CV, kind of in parentheses afterwards, that it's an invited presentation. So they're like, hey, we want you to come here, because that even looks even a little bit stronger on it. So yes, that will absolutely help. And congrats on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
It looks like so one UNLV graduate program can require the GRE while another one does not.
That is correct. Yes. So there's no UNLV wide requirement for that, and that's why it's always good to check with individual programs, right? So because there can be different tests required for different programs. So, for example, when I was applying to PhD programs, some of the schools I applied to required the GRE subject test in English, which very few schools require anymore. There's not too many subject tests out there anymore. So I had to take that for, I think, two of the schools I applied to required it. So I had to take it for those two schools if I wanted to apply. But yes, yeah, so definitely check with your schools. And, if you're just not interested in standardized testing, depending on your field, it may be possible to find a number of programs that don't require the GRE or the Gmat. And then sort of go from there. But if you're going to law school or you're going to med school or dental school, you're taking those big nasty exams. I can promise you, they're all looking at those scores.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I recently took the graduate record exam, and I would say I got a pretty good score. My only question is, well, I don't know if this might vary from program to program or school to school, but like this, I got like right around the averages of students like getting admitted into most of the programs I'm looking at. Is it beneficial to retake the test and get like an even better score, like to like score higher than the average of admitted students, or is it just a waste of time and I should be focusing on other parts of my application?
That's a great question. Um, I I don't know that I can for sure 100% answer that. I can share what I did, which is I was in the same boat you were. I got the scores that I needed for the schools I was interested in. And then I just went and worked on other things. So I don't think it hurts to go back and get a higher score, but I think that you don't want to do that to the detriment of other parts of your application. So I think it's really sort of an individual choice. I hate to be kind of wishy-washy like that, but I think if you're in the average range, then I think one way of thinking about this is like, are you competitive for the programs you're looking at? And if you're in that average score range, then I think in terms of GRE scores, you are competitive. I would also say that it's totally acceptable to reach out to a program and sort of ask them if there are particular parts of the application that they weight more than others. And that may be a way of getting your question answered too. So I wish I had a clearer and more cogent answer for you than that, but I think that you're probably okay, but that it might not hurt too, which I think is what you already knew.
No, no, no. That it helps to hear from somebody who has like expertise in this kind of stuff. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Dave, I had one private question. How can I familiarize myself with the faculty of the graduate programs that interest me?
So that's a great question. I would go to like program websites. Once you find out the programs that you're interested in, you know, look on, Google that program and then and put faculty after it. A lot of times faculty will have their CVs listed online, like you can download them and look at them. Other times they will have a website for themselves, or their lab. If you're looking at something that's lab-based, their lab will have a website as well, or it may be all three of those. And again, I also think that, if you find somebody that looks really interesting, don't be afraid to send them an email and be like, hey, I'm really interested in doing a graduate degree in your program. And I've seen that you work in this area and I'm interested in this. Keep in mind, this is stuff that people have devoted their entire lives to. They want to talk about it with somebody else. They want to share about it. Because they have the same experience that we do sometimes, right? So you all have things that you all are very interested in that are maybe that you don't get to talk about a lot, right? With other people, and you get really excited if you do get to talk about it. That's the way they are, because otherwise, I'm an academic. I've been at those cocktail parties where somebody asks you what your research is, and you try and explain it to them, and their eyes just glaze over like 10 seconds in. And they're like, so you can be that person that they can talk about it with. So I would say, yeah, check out websites, see if their CVs are online, see if they have a website themselves, their labs are online, read some of their research, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Perfect. I had a very specific question. You might have the link handy, Dave. What is the deadline for the MBA program if the student was interested in attending a fall of 2022?
I'm going to look it up really quick. I'm pretty sure it's July 1st. So you got plenty of time if you're looking at fall, but let me double check that before I just sort of shoot from the hip here.
I think it's July 15th.
July 15th. Yes. Okay. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes. Okay. So I'm glad we checked. Yeah. So July 15th is the deadline for that. Keep in mind though that if you're looking to get funding or scholarships or things like that, you'll want an application in far sooner than that. That's sort of that last minute, like they're going to look at your application really quick and tell you to come on in the house. But they're not going to really have much money or anything like that for you. So just be aware of that.
Thanks, Dave, for double checking that. Hassan, did you want to ask a question? I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question to Dave. For programs that are usually that start around fall 2020, 22, when is the usual application deadline? Is there a usual deadline, or does it depends on the program specifically?
That's a great question as well. It kind of does depend on the program. I can give you some general things though I'd sort of look for. So doctoral programs usually have earlier deadlines than master's programs. They can be around the same time, but it really sort of depends. But generally speaking, doctoral programs usually have deadlines in December, January, or February for the following fall. Master's programs can be a little bit longer. So it really is going to vary. When I was applying to PhD programs in English, I think my earliest deadline was December 15th. My latest deadline was January 30th. So they were, and I had 6 schools. So they were all sort of falling around in there. And I think that programs around the country tend to have, in similar fields, tend to have similar deadlines. This is another good thing to sort of talk about as well, which is sort of how programs process applications. So generally speaking, the later the deadline, the more likely it is that the program will do what are called rolling admissions, which is they take a look at the applications as they come in and make decisions. Okay. So in that case, right, you're looking at, there is some value to being in earlier because, if you wait till the last minute, they may have already given out all their money. And plus you just know quicker, right? Other programs, and generally these are programs with earlier deadlines, do not do rolling admissions. They look at all the applications at once. So again, doctoral programs tend to be like that, where they have earlier deadlines. I know in the English department, our deadline was January 15th. We did not look at a single application before January 15th. On January 16th, we started pulling together all the applications, looking through everything. And then there was a couple of big meetings where everybody kind of got to weigh in. It was on the committee, and then decisions got made, and then letters were sent out. So it really sort of depends on the individual program. But this is another case where this is always something that I struggled with. Like I never knew what I was allowed to ask and what was kind of bad form. And it turns out that like there wasn't very much that was bad form. The people again are happy to give you this information. So it's totally acceptable to email a program and ask them if they do rolling admissions or not. Because if they do rolling admissions, there is, like I said, some advantage to trying to get your application in a little bit earlier. If they don't, then you don't buy yourself anything by getting it in way early. Again, though, I would still put it in a few days early, just to have enough time, just in case there's a snag somewhere in the process.
This is Hassan, just to follow up. You just mentioned that for the was it rolling? Is rolling. So do engineering programs tend to have that, or is it just generally that depends on the program itself?
It really depends on the program itself. I would say, for engineering, it can vary. I would look again at like when the deadline is. You'll also sometimes see something called like a priority deadline, which is sometimes there's a deadline for funding and then there's an overall deadline. So the funding deadline might be earlier, and they'll usually indicate that on their website. But again, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to the individual programs and being like, hey, do you all do rolling admissions? Or saying like, hey, I'm really interested in a graduate assistantship. Like, is there a date that I will need to get my application into you in order to be considered for a graduate assistantship? But if you're not really looking for any of that, if you're just sort of looking to go then you can hit whatever that final deadline is, and it really won't it really won't cost you anything. But it can if you're looking for those assistantships and scholarships and things like that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
One last question, Dave, before we wrap up. The link that I sent with the application deadlines, those aren't typically changed, right? They're fall, spring, and summer. They're typically the same every year.
They're typically the same every year. Occasionally a program will kick out its deadline. We've seen a lot more of that during the pandemic, but if that's the case, it'll say like, it'll have the application deadline, and then it will say, like fall 2022 only, all other years, the deadline is this. And the deadlines are not drastically different. It's usually like 2 weeks or a month or something. But yeah, those are pretty stable. And if you see on there, if there's no date listed, that means they don't accept applications for that term, right? So if it says NA, like biological sciences, for example, right, their application deadline for fall is January 15th. It says NA for spring, NA for summer. They do not accept applications in those terms.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your great questions. Best of luck to you in the process. Join us for some of our workshops, and I hope that you'll all be joining us as grad rebels. But more than that, I hope that you all find the right program for you and have great success in the application process. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Dave. If everyone could just take a few seconds to fill out the workshop feedback survey, I dropped it in the chat. I hope you all have a nice rest of your day.